My mother looked me dead in the eyes at Christmas dinner and said, "Caitlin struggles. She always has." The whole table laughed. My father, my sister, my aunts and uncles, everyone. Then my father leaned back in his chair and added, "You should try being more like Hannah. At least she knows how to live." Hannah, my unemployed sister, who maxed out 3 credit cards buying designer bags. I was 37 years old. I had spent my entire life trying to earn their respect. And in that moment, surrounded by people who were supposed to love me, I finally understood the truth. I never had a chance. So I sent them one last Christmas invitation, an olive branch, a final test. My sister tore it in half and laughed. My mother said, "What could she even serve us ramen?" They had no idea that invitation came from a $3 million mansion. They had no idea I had built a company worth 7 figures. They had no idea my husband was the CEO they had been trying to impress for years. But they were about to find out. Because when those Christmas party photos went viral, when they saw the mansion, the string quartet, the life I built without them, suddenly my phone exploded. Mom texted, "Caitlin, can we come? Please." I hit the laugh reaction and said nothing. What happened next exposed secrets my family had been hiding for 20 years, secrets about a stolen scholarship, a sabotaged award, and a letter my mother wrote when I was 15 that explained everything. This is the story of how my family tried to destroy me and how I made them watch me win. Stay until the end. Trust me, you will not see the final twist coming. I was 5 years old when I realized my mother loved my sister more than she loved me. It was not a dramatic moment. There was no fight, no screaming, no obvious cruelty. It was Christmas morning, and Hannah had just opened her present, a beautiful porcelain doll with golden hair and a velvet dress. She squealed with delight, and my mother's face lit up like I had never seen before. Pure joy, pure connection. Then I opened my present, a coloring book. Used. The pages already had faded crayon marks from some other child. I looked at my mother, waiting for an explanation. She just shrugged and said, "You're the practical one, Caitlin. You don't need fancy things." I was 5. I did not know what practical meant, but I understood the feeling in my chest, the hollow ache of being less than, of being an afterthought. That feeling never went away. Growing up, I was the invisible daughter. Hannah got piano lessons. I got hand-me-down clothes. Hannah got praise for simply existing. I got silence when I brought home straight A's. When Hannah failed a class, my parents hired a tutor and called it extra support. When I won a regional spelling bee, my mother forgot to attend. The strangest part was that Hannah was not exceptional. She was not smarter than me or more talented or kinder. She was simply easier. She needed my mother in a way I never did. She cried when things got hard. She asked for help. She made my mother feel essential. I did not. I figured things out on my own. I solved my problems quietly. And for that, I was punished with neglect. Aunt Margaret was the only one who saw it. She was my mother's younger sister, a soft-spoken woman who visited every few months and watched our family with sad, knowing eyes. Once when I was 12, she pulled me aside and whispered, "You're special, Caitlin. Don't let them make you forget that." But when she tried to say something to my mother about the favoritism, she was shut down immediately. "You don't have children, Margaret. You don't understand." After that, Aunt Margaret stopped trying. She just watched, and I could always see the apology in her eyes, silent, helpless, constant. By the time I was a teenager, I had accepted my role. I was the daughter who did not matter, the one who would never be celebrated, only tolerated. I stopped expecting birthday parties. I stopped hoping for compliments. I built a wall around my heart and learned to survive on my own approval. But even walls have cracks. And last Christmas, mine finally broke. The dinner was at my parents' house, the same house where I had grown up feeling like a guest. The table was set beautifully. My mother always cared about appearances, and the family had gathered in full force. Aunts, uncles, cousins. And of course, Hannah sitting next to my mother like a princess beside her queen. The conversation, as always, revolved around Hannah. "Hannah, tell everyone about your new apartment," my mother said, beaming. Hannah launched into a dramatic story about her cozy downtown loft, which I happened to know she could not afford. She had been unemployed for 8 months and was living off credit cards and loans she had no intention of repaying. But to hear my mother tell it, Hannah was thriving. "She's so independent," my mother gushed. "So brave." I sat quietly pushing mashed potatoes around my plate. No one asked about my life. No one asked about my work, my home, my plans. I was wallpaper, background noise. Then my uncle turned to me with a polite smile. "So, Caitlin, how are things with you?" Before I could answer, my mother jumped in. "Oh, Caitlin struggles," she said, her voice dripping with pity. "She always has." The table laughed. Not cruelly exactly, more like they were in on a joke I was not supposed to hear. Poor Caitlin. Struggling Caitlin. The family disappointment. My father leaned back in his chair and added, "You know, Caitlin, you should try being more like Hannah. At least she knows how to enjoy life." Hannah smirked. My mother nodded approvingly. I was 37 years old. I had built a business from nothing. I owned property. I had a life they knew nothing about because they had never bothered to ask. And yet here I was being lectured about success by people who had no idea what success actually looked like. Something inside me shifted. It was not anger. Anger was hot and reactive, and I had felt that before. This was different. This was cold, quiet, final. I looked around the table at these people who claimed to be my family. My mother, who had spent my entire childhood making me feel small. My father, who had never once defended me. My sister, who had taken everything handed to her and still looked at me with contempt. I realized with absolute clarity that I was the only adult in the room. They would never change. They would never see me. They would never stop treating me like the disappointing child I had never actually been. And for the first time in my life, I stopped wanting them to. I finished my dinner in silence. I smiled politely. I said my goodbyes. And as I drove home through the cold December night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done explaining myself, done hoping for acceptance, done being their quiet disappointment. If they wanted to see me as a failure, fine. Let them. But before this was over, they were going to see exactly what kind of failure I had become. And that was the Christmas I decided I was done being their quiet disappointment. The drive home from that Christmas dinner took 45 minutes, but the decision took only 5. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I was going to give my family one final chance, not because I believed they deserved it, but because I needed to know with absolute certainty whether reconciliation was possible. I needed to close the door myself, not have it slammed in my face by default. I spent 3 days designing the invitation. I wanted it to be elegant, but warm formal, but personal. I chose heavy cream cardstock with subtle gold embossing. The wording was simple. You are invited to Christmas at Caitlin's home, December 23rd, 6 p.m. Dinner, music, and family. I did not include my address. I did not mention the house. I wanted them to come because they wanted to see me, not because they were curious about where I lived. The invitation was an olive branch, a test. A question I already suspected I knew the answer to. I mailed 4 invitations, one to my parents, one to Hannah, one to Aunt Margaret, and one to my uncle's family. Then I waited. Aunt Margaret called me 2 days later. "Caitlin," she said, her voice careful, "I need to tell you something about your invitation." My stomach tightened. What happened? She paused. I could hear her breathing the way she does when she is trying to find the right words. "I was at your parents' house when the mail arrived. Your mother opened the envelope at the kitchen table. Hannah was there, so was your father. And your mother laughed, Caitlin. She read it out loud and laughed." I closed my eyes. I had expected rejection. I had braced for dismissal. But laughter. That was something else entirely. She said, "Can you believe this? Caitlin thinks she can host Christmas. She can't even host a normal dinner, let alone a holiday." Aunt Margaret's voice cracked slightly. Then Hannah grabbed the invitation out of her hands and tore it in half, right there at the table. She said, "What would she even serve us ramen noodles?" I said nothing. The silence stretched between us, heavy and painful. "Your father just sat there," Aunt Margaret continued. "He watched the whole thing and nodded, like he agreed, like it was all some big joke." I had spent 37 years hoping my family would change. 37 years making excuses for their behavior, telling myself that maybe next time would be different, maybe next year they would see me. And in one phone call, I finally understood that hope had been a lie I told myself to survive. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," Aunt Margaret said softly. "I'm so sorry." "It's not your fault," I said. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. "Thank you for telling me." "Caitlin, wait. There's something else, something I've been holding on to for a very long time. Can you meet me tomorrow? Alone?" I agreed, though I had no idea what she could possibly want to give me. The next evening, I met Aunt Margaret in the parking lot of a small coffee shop on the edge of town. She was sitting in her car when I arrived, and she looked older than I had ever seen her, tired, burdened, like she had been carrying something heavy for years and was finally ready to set it down. I climbed into the passenger seat and closed the door against the cold. "Thank you for coming," she said. She did not look at me. Her hands were folded in her lap, and between her fingers was a yellowed envelope worn at the edges and clearly very old. "What is that?" I asked. "Your mother wrote this," Aunt Margaret said slowly, "when you were 15 years old. She never sent it. She never even told you it existed." She finally turned to look at me, and her eyes were filled with something I could not quite name. Sorrow, guilt, maybe even fear. "I found it by accident years ago. I kept it because I knew someday you would need to understand." "Understand what?" She pressed the envelope into my hands. It was lighter than I expected, but it felt enormous, like it contained something that could change everything. "Your mother is not a simple woman, Caitlin. The way she treated you, the favoritism, the dismissal, it wasn't random. It wasn't just neglect." Aunt Margaret's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "It was deliberate, and this letter explains why." I stared at the envelope. My name was written on the front in my mother's handwriting, neat and precise. Seeing it made my chest ache in a way I did not expect. "Why didn't you give this to me sooner?" I asked. "Because you weren't ready," she said. "You were still hoping, still trying. If I had given you this letter 10 years ago, it would have destroyed you. But now—" She paused, searching my face. "Now I think you're strong enough to know the truth. And I think you deserve it." I did not open the envelope. Not there, not in her car, not with her watching. Some things need to be faced alone. I thanked Aunt Margaret. I hugged her for a long time, longer than I had hugged anyone in years. And then I drove home with the envelope sitting on the passenger seat like a ticking bomb. It took me 3 hours to finally open it. I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of wine, turning the envelope over and over in my hands, preparing myself for whatever was inside. Then I slid my finger under the seal and pulled out the letter. And inside that envelope, my entire childhood suddenly made sense. The letter was written on plain white paper, now yellowed with age. My mother's handwriting filled 2 pages, neat, controlled, deliberate. The same handwriting that had signed permission slips and birthday cards throughout my childhood, but this time carrying words she never intended me to see. I read the first line and felt the ground shift beneath me. "Caitlin, I am writing this because I cannot say it to your face, and I probably never will." My hands trembled slightly as I continued. "You are 15 years old, and already I can see what you are becoming. Smart, independent, capable. You solve your own problems. You don't need anyone's help. You don't need me." I paused reading that last sentence again. "You don't need me." I had always thought that was a good thing, being self-sufficient, not being a burden. I never realized it was something my mother held against me. "When you were born, I thought you would be like Hannah, soft, dependent. A daughter who would look up to me, who would need my guidance and my love. Instead, you came out with fire in your eyes. You walked early, you talked early. By the time you were 3, you were correcting my grammar." I remembered none of this. No one had ever told me. "I know this is hard to understand, but your independence made me feel small. Every time you figured something out on your own, every time you didn't ask for help, I felt like I was failing as a mother. What was my purpose if you didn't need me? Hannah needed me. Hannah made me feel essential. But you made me feel invisible in my own family. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Not tears of sadness, something more complicated. Something that felt like decades of confusion finally crystallizing into painful clarity. So I made a choice. I decided to dim your light, not destroy it. I am not a monster, but dim it. Keep you uncertain, keep you reaching for approval that I would never fully give. I thought if I held back just enough love, just enough praise, you would stay. You would need me the way Hannah does. I set the letter down and pressed my palms flat against the kitchen table, trying to steady myself. My mother had deliberately withheld love. Not because I was unworthy of it, but because I was too worthy. Because my strength threatened her sense of purpose. All those years of wondering what was wrong with me. All those nights lying awake, replaying every interaction, searching for the flaw that made me unlovable. And the whole time there was no flaw. There was only a woman too insecure to let her daughter shine. I picked up the letter again. Hannah needs constant attention. She cannot function without praise, without support, without someone telling her she is special. You never needed that. So I gave everything to Hannah and kept you hungry. I told myself it was for the best, that you would be fine, that you were strong enough to survive without me. And you were. You always were. The admission was breathtaking in its cruelty. My mother had weaponized my resilience against me. She had punished me for being strong by making sure I never felt strong enough. The next paragraph made my breath catch. Your father tried to stop me once. When you were 12, he told me I was being unfair. He said you deserved the same attention as Hannah. He wanted to spend more time with you to make sure you knew you were loved. I remembered being 12. That was the year I won the spelling bee. The year my mother forgot to come. I told him if he took your side, I would leave and take Hannah with me. I told him he could have his precious Caitlin, but he would lose everything else. He backed down. He chose silence to keep the family together. I am not proud of this, but I want you to understand your father is not a bad man. He is just weak, and I used that weakness to get what I wanted. My father, the man who sat silently at every dinner table while my mother diminished me. The man who nodded approvingly when Hannah tore my invitation in half. He had wanted to defend me once, and my mother had threatened to destroy the family if he did. He chose peace over justice, comfort over courage. He was not evil, but he was a coward, and his cowardice had cost me a father. I finished the letter in silence. There was no apology at the end, no expression of regret, just a final paragraph that read, I am writing this because someday you might need to understand. Not to forgive me, I don't expect that. But to know the truth. You were never the problem, Caitlin. You were just too much for me to handle. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time after I finished reading. The wine grew warm, the house grew dark, and something inside me, something that had been broken for 37 years, finally began to heal. Not because my mother had apologized. She had not. Not because I forgave her. I did not, but because I finally understood. The rejection, the favoritism, the cruelty, none of it was about me. It was about her, her insecurities, her fears, her desperate need to feel needed by someone who could not function without her. I had spent my entire life trying to earn love from a woman who was threatened by my existence. I had twisted myself into knots trying to be smaller, quieter, less intimidating, and it never would have worked. Nothing I did would have changed her. The game was rigged from the start. But knowing that changed me. For the first time in my life, I stopped doubting my worth. I stopped wondering if I was enough. I stopped caring whether my family approved of me. They had feared my success my entire life. They were about to see what real success looked like. Reading that letter did not change my past, but it changed how I understood it. And understanding gave me something I had never truly possessed before: permission to stop looking backward and start building forward. The truth is, I had already been building for almost 20 years. My family just never noticed. When I turned 18, my parents made it clear that their financial support, what little there had been, was over. Hannah was starting college that same year, and they needed to focus their resources on her. The message was unspoken, but unmistakable. Hannah was the investment. I was the write-off. I moved out 3 weeks after my 18th birthday with 2 suitcases, $400 in savings, and absolutely no safety net. I found a tiny studio apartment above a laundromat, the kind of place where the walls were thin enough to hear every conversation, and the radiator only worked when it felt like it. The rent was $600 a month, which meant I needed to work constantly just to survive. So I worked. I waitressed at a diner from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. I worked the front desk at a motel from 3 until 11. On weekends, I did freelance bookkeeping for small businesses, something I had taught myself from library books because I could not afford accounting classes. I slept 5 hours a night, ate ramen and canned soup, and told myself that this was temporary, that I was building something even if no one else could see it. I enrolled in community college because it was all I could afford. I took classes whenever I could fit them around my work schedule, early mornings, late nights, online when possible. It took me 6 years to finish a degree that should have taken 2, but I finished. No one in my family came to the graduation. I did not invite them. Those years were brutal, but they forged something inside me that could not be broken. I learned how to read people, which customers would tip well, which motel guests would cause problems, which business owners would actually pay their invoices on time. I learned how to manage money down to the penny, how to stretch a dollar until it screamed, how to build a budget that left room for emergencies, because emergencies always came. Most importantly, I learned never to depend on anyone who could abandon me. The only person I could truly count on was myself. Somewhere in the middle of all that survival, I discovered something unexpected. I loved making things. It started as a hobby. I would find old picture frames at thrift stores, refinish them, add small decorative touches, and hang them in my tiny apartment. Friends, the few I had time to make, started asking if I could make frames for them. Then their friends asked, then strangers. I opened an Etsy shop almost as a joke. I called it Reed Creations and listed a dozen handmade frames expecting nothing. The first one sold within a week, then another, then 5 more. I became obsessed with understanding why certain products sold and others did not. I studied market trends during my breaks at the diner, scrolling through competitor shops and analyzing what made customers click buy. I read every piece of feedback like it was scripture, adjusting my designs based on what people actually wanted rather than what I assumed they would like. Every dollar of profit went back into the business. Better materials, improved packaging, small upgrades that made each product feel more premium. Within 2 years, I had expanded beyond frames to include wall art, decorative mirrors, and seasonal home accents. Within 5 years, I had rebranded as Reed Home and Lifestyle and moved production out of my apartment into a small warehouse space. My revenue crossed 6 figures, then 7. I hired employees. I built systems. I created something real. My family never asked about any of it. During holidays and rare phone calls, they still talked about me like I was barely getting by. Poor Caitlin working all those jobs. They assumed I was stuck in the same survival mode I had been in at 18. I never corrected them. Part of me enjoyed knowing something they did not. Part of me was simply tired of trying to impress people who had already decided I was a failure. Then I met Ethan. It was at a home goods industry conference in Chicago. I was there to network with suppliers. He was there to scout potential investments for his firm. We ended up at the same cocktail table during a painfully boring keynote speech, and he made a dry comment about the speaker's tie that made me laugh out loud, probably too loud, because several people turned to stare. We talked for 3 hours that night. He asked about my business and actually listened to the answers. He wanted to know how I had built it, what challenges I had faced, what I was planning next. No one had ever asked me those questions with genuine curiosity. Most people just wanted to talk about themselves. But what truly drew me to Ethan was his story. He came from a wealthy family who had planned his entire life for him, the right schools, the right career, the right marriage, to a woman from another prominent family. When he refused the arranged marriage, they cut him off completely. He walked away from a guaranteed fortune to build his own path just like I had. We understood each other in a way that did not require explanation. 2 people who had been rejected by the families that should have supported them, who had built everything from nothing, who knew the value of independence, because we had paid for it in loneliness and struggle. We became partners, equals, two broken pieces that somehow fit together perfectly. And together, we bought a house that would change everything. The house found us before we were even looking. Ethan and I had talked vaguely about buying property together, maybe something outside the city where we could breathe and think and build a life without the constant noise. But we were both so focused on our businesses that it remained a someday conversation always pushed to the back burner behind more urgent priorities. Then, his colleague mentioned a property that had just come on the market. A New England-style estate in one of the most prestigious neighborhoods in the region, owned by an elderly couple who were moving to be closer to their grandchildren. It needed work, but the bones were extraordinary original hardwood floors, hand-carved moldings, windows that let in light, like the house was breathing. We drove out to see it on a gray November afternoon, expecting nothing. By the time we walked through the front door, we both knew. This was home. The purchase took 3 months. The renovation took another 18. We worked with architects who understood our vision. Classic elegance blended with warmth and comfort. This was not going to be a showpiece designed to impress strangers. It was going to be a sanctuary, a place where every room felt lived in and loved. We chose deep wood tones and soft fabrics, antique fixtures and modern conveniences hidden seamlessly beneath traditional details. The kitchen was designed for actual cooking, not just photographs. The living room had fireplaces that actually worked and furniture you could sink into without worrying about damaging anything. When the renovation was complete, the estate was worth just over $3 million. But the number meant nothing to me compared to what the house represented. Every beam, every stone, every carefully chosen detail was proof of what I had built. Not inherited, not given, built with my own hands and my own mind and years of work that no one in my family had ever acknowledged. For Christmas, I decorated the house myself. I wanted it to feel like the holidays I had always imagined but never experienced, warm, nostalgic, filled with the kind of beauty that makes you stop and breathe. I hung soft golden lights along the exterior, outlining the roofline and wrapping around the porch columns. Inside, I placed a towering Douglas fir in the main hall, decorated with vintage ornaments and simple white lights that made the whole room glow. The scent of cinnamon and pine drifted through every hallway. Candles flickered on mantels and windowsills. It looked like something from a magazine, but it felt like something much more personal. It felt like everything I had ever wanted Christmas to be. Ethan suggested we host a small gathering, just close friends, a few business associates, people who had supported us over the years. Nothing extravagant, just good food and good company in our new home. I agreed, though I was nervous in a way I could not quite explain. Showing people this house felt vulnerable somehow, like I was finally letting them see a part of myself I had kept hidden for years. The party was perfect. We hired a string quartet to play softly in the corner. The caterer prepared dishes that were elegant but approachable. Guests wandered through the rooms with glasses of wine, admiring the architecture and the decorations and the view of snow falling gently outside the tall windows. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere beautiful. Ethan took photos throughout the evening. He always did that, documenting moments he wanted to remember. Toward the end of the night, he posted a few of them to his social media. Nothing elaborate, just casual shots. The glowing lights, the string quartet, me standing by the Christmas tree in a deep green velvet dress, smiling in a way I barely recognized as my own face. He did not tag me. He did not mention my name. He just shared the images with a simple caption, "Christmas at home." I did not think anything of it. Ethan had a modest following, mostly professional contacts and old friends. I assumed the photos would get a few polite likes and disappear into the endless scroll of holiday content. I was wrong. By the next morning, the photos had been shared dozens of times. Friends of friends recognized the neighborhood and started asking questions. Local acquaintances identified me in the background and tagged my name in comments. Someone created a hashtag, something ridiculous like "Reed Mansion Christmas," and suddenly everyone in our extended social circle was talking about the beautiful estate and the successful couple who owned it. My phone started buzzing around noon. At first, it was just friends and colleagues sending congratulations and asking for tours. Then the messages shifted. Hannah texted first, "Is this your place?" Since when do you live in a mansion?" I stared at the message for a long moment, then set my phone down without responding. An hour later, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was tense, almost breathless. "Caitlin, I saw some photos online. That house. When did this happen? Why didn't you tell us? Call me back. We need to talk." My father sent an email, formal and stiff, the way he always communicated when he wanted something. He wrote about family unity and staying connected, and how he hoped we could put any misunderstandings behind us. I read every message with a cold, quiet smile. These were the same people who had called me poor, the same people who had laughed when I invited them to Christmas, the same people who had spent 37 years treating me like a disappointment, not worth their attention. Now they were desperate, confused, afraid of what they had missed. I did not respond to any of them. I let them wonder. I let them panic. I let them sit with the realization that the daughter they had dismissed had become someone they could no longer ignore. And then the begging began. The messages kept coming for 3 days. At first they were curious, almost accusatory. "How did you afford this? Why didn't you tell us? What are you hiding?" But by the 4th day, the tone shifted dramatically. Curiosity became desperation. Accusations became pleas. That was when I learned the truth about my family's finances. It started with a voicemail from my father. His voice sounded different than I had ever heard it, thin, strained, stripped of the casual arrogance he usually carried. He asked me to call him back urgently. He said it was important. He said the word please 3 times in a 90-second message. I called him back more out of curiosity than compassion. The story came out in fragments, like he was ashamed to say it all at once. 5 years ago, he had invested a significant portion of their savings into a business opportunity that a friend had recommended. The opportunity turned out to be fraudulent. The money disappeared. Worse, my father had convinced several other people to invest as well, and now some of them were threatening legal action. He was facing potential lawsuits, maybe even criminal charges, if prosecutors decided he had knowingly participated in the scheme. I listened in silence, letting him talk. He had never spoken to me this honestly in my entire life. My mother's situation was different, but equally dire. She had spent decades maintaining appearances, the nice house, the nice car, the nice clothes, the generous gifts for Hannah. All of it funded by credit cards. She had accumulated nearly $200,000 in debt, making minimum payments for years, while the interest compounded into something monstrous. The bills were now impossible to manage. Collectors were calling daily. She had hidden the extent of it from my father until recently, and the revelation had nearly destroyed their marriage. And then there was Hannah. My sister had never held a job for more than 6 months. She had bounced between careers and cities and relationships, always landing softly because our parents caught her every time she fell. But she had also been living far beyond any means she actually possessed, funding her lifestyle with student loans from a graduate program she never finished. Those loans were now coming due over $150,000 with interest rates that made my stomach turn. Hannah had no income, no savings, and no plan. Their entire financial house was collapsing, and for reasons I still did not fully understand, they had waited until they saw photos of my mansion to finally ask for help. The family group chat became a war zone. My father blamed my mother for the credit card debt. My mother blamed my father for the failed investment. Hannah blamed both of them for not preparing her for the real world. They fought viciously, airing grievances that had clearly been simmering for years. And then, almost as an afterthought, they remembered I was watching. The messages shifted toward me. Suddenly, they were united again, not by love, but by need. "Caitlin, you have to help us. We're family. You're the only one who can fix this. We raised you. We sacrificed for you. Now it's your turn to give back." I read that last message from my mother and felt something cold settle in my chest. We raised you. The same woman who had written a letter confessing that she deliberately held me back, that she dimmed my light to keep me dependent, was now invoking her parental sacrifice as a reason I owed her money. They did not apologize for the Christmas dinner. They did not acknowledge the torn invitation. They did not mention the decades of dismissal and cruelty. They simply expected me to save them because I was family, and I had the resources, and that was what daughters were supposed to do. I let them wait for 2 days before responding. When I finally replied, I kept my message brief and businesslike. I told them I would consider helping, but only if certain conditions were met first. I required each of them, my mother, my father, and Hannah, to send me a formal written apology via email. The apology had to specifically acknowledge that they had dismissed and mistreated me for years. It had to be in their own words, not copied from a template, and it had to demonstrate genuine understanding of what they had done. Additionally, I required a written commitment from each of them. They would not contact me unless I initiated contact first. They would not appear at my home unless I explicitly invited them. They would not discuss my personal life or finances with anyone outside the immediate family. If they violated any of these terms, I would immediately withdraw any assistance and cut off all communication permanently. In return, I would review their financial situations and consider providing help, not a blank check, but structured assistance with conditions attached. I expected pushback. I expected negotiations, arguments, maybe even outrage at my controlling demands. Instead, the apology emails arrived within hours. They were hastily written, clearly composed in panic rather than reflection. My mother's was 3 sentences long. My father's blamed his silence on trying to keep the peace. Hannah's was mostly about how hard her life had been and how she was also a victim of our parents' dysfunction. None of them truly understood what they were apologizing for, but they signed. They agreed to my terms. They sent the written commitments without reading carefully, without thinking about what they were promising, without considering that I might actually hold them to their word. They thought signing meant I would save them. They had no idea what they had just agreed to. The Christmas party was never about revenge. It was about celebration, honoring the life I had built and the people who had helped me build it. I spent weeks planning every detail. I wanted the evening to feel like stepping into a memory, the kind of Christmas that exists in old photographs and classic films. Golden candlelight flickered from every surface, casting warm shadows across the walls. The string quartet played softly in the corner, moving through traditional carols with gentle precision. The air was thick with the scent of cinnamon pine and cranberry smells that wrapped around you like a blanket and made you want to stay forever. The guest list was carefully curated. I invited business partners who had taken chances on me when my company was still small. I invited friends who had seen me through the hardest years, who had sat with me in tiny apartments and listened to my dreams without judgment. I invited colleagues who respected my work and neighbors who had welcomed us into the community. Every person in that room had believed in me when belief was hard to come by, and I invited Aunt Margaret. She arrived early, wearing a deep burgundy dress and looking more nervous than I had ever seen her. I met her at the door and hugged her for a long time, feeling her thin shoulders relax against me. "This is beautiful, Caitlin," she whispered. "You did all of this yourself." "Not all of it," I said. "You helped more than you know." Later in the evening, after dinner had been served and glasses had been refilled, I asked for everyone's attention. The room quieted, faces turning toward me with warm expectation. I had never been comfortable with public speaking, but this felt different. These were my people. This was my home. "I want to thank all of you for being here tonight," I began. "This house, this party, this life, none of it would exist without the people who believed in me when I was still learning to believe in myself." I looked across the room until I found Aunt Margaret standing near the Christmas tree with a glass of wine clutched in both hands. "But there is one person I need to thank specifically, my Aunt Margaret." She looked startled, almost frightened, as every head turned toward her. For most of my life, I felt invisible to my family. I was overlooked, dismissed, made to feel like I would never be enough. But Aunt Margaret saw me. She always saw me. Even when she couldn't say anything, even when speaking up would have caused her trouble, she found ways to let me know I mattered. My voice caught slightly, but I pressed forward. A few weeks ago, she gave me something that changed everything. A letter that explained why my childhood felt the way it did. That letter didn't erase the pain, but it set me free. It helped me understand that I was never the problem. I raised my glass toward her. "Aunt Margaret, thank you for keeping that letter safe for 20 years. Thank you for waiting until I was strong enough to read it. And thank you for being the one person in my family who loved me without conditions." The room erupted in applause. Aunt Margaret's eyes filled with tears, and she pressed a hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. Several guests moved to embrace her, and I watched from across the room with a feeling I could not quite name, something between grief and gratitude, loss and healing. The party continued beautifully after that. Guests mingled and laughed, the quartet played requests, and the night took on the warm, timeless quality I had hoped for. I moved through the rooms accepting compliments and making conversation, feeling genuinely happy in a way that still surprised me. It was near the end of the evening when I found myself standing with Mrs. Patterson, my high school English teacher. I had invited her on impulse, remembering her as one of the few adults who had encouraged my writing and told me I had potential. She was retired now, silver-haired and soft-spoken, but her eyes still carried the same sharpness I remembered from her classroom. "Caitlin, this is remarkable," she said, gesturing at the room around us. "I always knew you would do something extraordinary." "You were one of the only people who thought so," I said. She smiled, but something shifted in her expression, a hesitation, a memory surfacing. "There's something I've wondered about for 20 years, she said slowly. "When you were 16, I nominated you for the State Academic Achievement Award. You were the strongest candidate I had ever put forward." I frowned. "I never knew about any nomination." "That's because it was withdrawn." Her voice dropped. "Someone called the school a woman claiming to be concerned about your well-being. She said you had psychological issues that made you unsuitable for public recognition. The committee pulled your name without investigating." My stomach turned cold. "I never found out who made that call," Mrs. Patterson continued. "It bothered me for years. But tonight, hearing about your family, hearing your speech about your aunt and that letter," she looked at me with sad, knowing eyes. "I think I finally know who it was." I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could speak, the security panel near the front door chimed loudly. The sound cut through the music and conversation, sharp and urgent. I glanced at Ethan across the room. He was already moving toward the monitor. It was 8:42 p.m., and the security alarm had just chimed. Ethan reached the security monitor before I did. His face told me everything I needed to know. "It's your family," he said quietly. "All 3 of them. At the front gate." I walked to the monitor and looked at the screen. The image was clear, despite the darkness outside. My father standing at the intercom, jabbing the button repeatedly. My mother leaning dramatically against the stone pillar, one hand pressed to her forehead as if she might collapse at any moment, and Hannah standing slightly apart from them, holding her phone up with the screen facing outward. She was filming. "They're making a scene," Ethan said. "Neighbors are starting to come outside." I watched as figures emerged from nearby houses drawn by the commotion. My father was shouting now, his voice carrying even through the security system's audio. "Caitlin, we know you're in there. You can't abandon your family like this. We're in crisis." My mother chose that moment to sink to her knees, clutching the gate for support. It was theatrical, designed to generate sympathy from anyone watching. She had always been skilled at playing the victim when it served her purposes. But it was Hannah who captured my attention. She was live streaming, narrating into her phone with dramatic intensity. I could not hear exactly what she was saying, but her expression was calculated, the wounded sister betrayed by cruel, heartless Caitlin. "What do you want to do?" Ethan asked. I watched the screen for another moment, thinking. They had violated the agreement they signed. They had shown up uninvited exactly as I had told them not to. They were trying to use public pressure to force my hand, believing that embarrassment would make me comply. They had no idea that their behavior was being recorded from multiple angles. They had no idea that they were proving in real time exactly who they really were. "Let them keep going," I said, "for now." I returned to the party and quietly asked a few trusted friends to keep things calm inside. Then I positioned myself near the window where I could watch the gate while monitoring Hannah's live stream on my phone. The comments on her broadcast were not going the way she expected. "Why are you showing up uninvited? That's harassment." "She doesn't owe you anything. This is embarrassing." Your sister has a right to set boundaries. Respect them. This is so cringe. You're making yourself look terrible. Hannah's expression shifted as she read the comments. Confusion first, then frustration, then anger. She had expected sympathy, the supportive chorus of strangers validating her grievances. Instead, she was being criticized, publicly, by thousands of people she had hoped would take her side. "You don't understand," she said into the camera, her voice rising. "Caitlin has always been like this. She thinks she's better than everyone. She's always looked down on us." And the comments kept coming harsher now. "Then why are you at her house begging for help? Sounds like jealousy to me." "Leave the poor woman alone." Hannah's composure cracked. Her face flushed red, and she started shouting at the phone as if the commenters could hear her frustration. She always thought she was better than me. Even when we were kids, I had to stop her from getting that scholarship because... She froze. Her mouth hung open, the words suspended in the air. She realized what she had just said, what she had just admitted. On camera, to thousands of viewers. The comments exploded. "Wait, what, you sabotaged her scholarship? Did she just confess to something? Oh my God, she just admitted it live." "This family is insane. Caitlin, run." Hannah lowered her phone, her face pale. My mother was asking her what happened, what she said, why she looked so upset. My father was still shouting at the gate, oblivious to the disaster unfolding beside him. I set my phone down and took a deep breath. It was time. I walked to the front door, pausing to check my reflection in the hallway mirror. My green velvet dress was still immaculate. My hair was still in place. I looked exactly like what I had become, a woman who had built her own life, who did not need anyone's permission, who could not be broken by people who had spent decades trying. I opened the front door and walked down the long driveway toward the gate. The cold December air hit my face, but I did not flinch. My heels clicked against the stone path with steady rhythm. As I approached, my family fell silent. My father stopped shouting. My mother rose from her theatrical collapse. Hannah lowered her phone, completely unable to meet my eyes. They stared at me like they were seeing a stranger, and in many ways they were. I stopped a few feet from the gate and looked at each of them slowly. My father red-faced and desperate. My mother calculating even in her pretended weakness. Hannah pale and trembling, knowing she had just destroyed herself in front of thousands of witnesses. "You came here uninvited," I said calmly. "You violated the agreement you signed. You made a public spectacle of yourselves in front of my neighbors and my guests." None of them spoke. "You want to talk," I continued. "Fine, but not here, inside, and you will hear what I have to say." I pressed the button to open the gate. The iron bars swung inward slowly. This was not surrender. This was control. I was choosing to confront them on my terms in my home, surrounded by people who knew my truth. They walked through the gate in silence, following me up the driveway toward the mansion. And what happened inside that mansion, none of them ever saw coming. I led them through the main hall without a word. Guests parted as we passed conversations, falling silent eyes following us with curiosity and concern. I did not stop to explain. I did not acknowledge the stares. I simply walked, and my family followed like children being escorted to the principal's office. My private study was at the back of the house, a room I had designed specifically for moments that required clarity and focus. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs, a large mahogany desk, positioned near the window. It was a room that commanded respect, and tonight it would serve as a courtroom. I closed the door behind us and gestured for them to sit. They did, arranging themselves awkwardly on the leather sofa, my mother in the middle, my father on her left, Hannah on her right. They looked smaller, somehow diminished by the grandeur of the room and the weight of what they had just done. I remained standing. "Before we begin," I said, "I want to make sure we all understand the situation clearly." I walked to my desk and opened a drawer, pulling out a folder I had prepared weeks ago. Inside were printed copies of the emails they had sent me, the apologies, the commitments, the promises they had made in exchange for my consideration. I placed the papers on the desk in front of them. "These are your signed agreements," I said. "You each acknowledged in writing that you mistreated me for years. You each committed to not contacting me unless I initiated contact first. You each promised never to appear at my home uninvited. I let the silence stretch. Tonight, you violated every single one of those commitments. You showed up without invitation. You caused a public disturbance. You attempted to manipulate me through embarrassment and social pressure. I looked at Hannah. And you broadcast a confession to thousands of strangers admitting that you sabotaged my scholarship opportunity 20 years ago. Hannah's face went pale again. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I have every legal and moral right to walk away from this room and never speak to any of you again, I continued. I owe you nothing. I have owed you nothing for a very long time. You made sure of that. My mother shifted in her seat, preparing to launch into one of her performances. I raised my hand to stop her. I am not finished. She froze. Despite everything you have done, despite the cruelty, the manipulation, the decades of making me feel worthless, I am going to offer you something you do not deserve. I am going to give you options. I moved to stand directly in front of them, close enough that they had to look up at me. Option 1. I walk away, completely. No money, no contact, no second chances. You figure out your financial disaster on your own, and I never think about any of you again. You become strangers to me, which is what you spent my entire childhood preparing me to accept anyway. My father's jaw tightened. Hannah stared at the floor. Option 2. You accept full responsibility for what you have done not just tonight, but for 37 years of mistreatment. You participate in a 12-month financial rehabilitation program that I will design and oversee. Budgeting classes, accountability meetings, regular check-ins to ensure you are actually learning to manage your money instead of waiting for someone to rescue you. If you complete the program successfully, I will help you become stable, not wealthy, stable. Enough to live without crisis, but not enough to pretend you earned something you didn't. I paused, letting the weight of the offer settle. Option 3. You reject everything I have said. You continue to blame me for your problems. You leave here tonight and tell everyone what a heartless daughter I am. And you face the consequences of your choices publicly, financially, and personally without any help from me whatsoever. The room was completely silent. I watched their faces as the reality of the situation sank in. For the first time in my life, I held all the power. They had come here expecting to pressure me into submission, and instead they found themselves facing a woman who did not need them, did not fear them, and was offering them mercy they had never extended to her. Hannah broke first. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she let out a choked sob that sounded more like frustration than genuine remorse. "This isn't fair," she said, her voice cracking. "You're punishing us. You're enjoying this." "I'm offering you a chance to fix your lives," I said calmly. "If that feels like punishment, perhaps you should consider what kind of life you've been living." My father's face had turned a deep shade of red. He would not look at me. He stared at his hands clenched in his lap, and I wondered if he was finally seeing clearly what his silence had cost not just me but himself. My mother was the most unsettling. She cycled through expressions like she was trying on masks, wounded victim righteous anger, calculated sweetness, searching for the one that would work on me. None of them did. Eventually, her face settled into something I had never seen before, genuine bewilderment. She could not understand how her weak, struggling daughter had become the person sitting in judgment of her. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, something shifted in the room. The anger began to drain from their postures. The defensiveness softened. They were beginning to understand that this was not cruelty. This was the most generous offer anyone had ever made to them. The silence stretched for what felt like hours, but nothing prepared me for who apologized first. It was my father who spoke first that night in the study. He chose option 2, his voice barely above a whisper, and my mother and Hannah followed reluctantly. They left the mansion in silence, and I did not hear from any of them for 3 days. On the 4th day, someone knocked on my door. I was not expecting visitors. Ethan was at work and the house staff had the afternoon off. I checked the security camera and felt my breath catch. Hannah stood alone on the front porch. No phone in her hand, no family behind her, Just my sister, looking smaller and more broken than I had ever seen her. I opened the door but did not invite her in. I waited. "I know I don't deserve to be here," she said. Her voice was raw, stripped of the dramatic performance I had grown so accustomed to. "I know I violated the agreement again. If you want to call the whole thing off, I understand." I said nothing. "I came because I need to tell you something, the truth, all of it." She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes, and I saw something I had never seen in my sister before: genuine devastation. Not the theatrical tears she used to manipulate. Something deeper, something real. "The scholarship," she said. "When we were 17, I deleted your emails. I changed your contact information so they couldn't reach you. I made sure you never knew you had been accepted." I had suspected as much since her live stream confession, but hearing her say it directly still felt like a punch to the chest. "Mom told me to do it," Hannah continued, her voice cracking. "She said if you went to that school, you would leave and never come back. She said you would forget about us, build your own life, and I would be left behind as the failure. She told me that if I stopped you, I would finally have a chance to be good enough." Tears streamed down her face. "But I was never good enough, Caitlin. Even with you held back, even with everything handed to me, I still failed. I have nothing, no career, no savings, no self-respect. I spent my whole life being the favorite, and it turns out being the favorite destroyed me." She took a shaky breath. "You won. You won everything. And I have to live knowing I tried to destroy you and it didn't work. You built this life anyway. You became everything Mom was afraid you would become. And I became exactly what she raised me to be, someone who can't survive without someone else to tear down." I stood in the doorway watching my sister unravel, and I felt something I did not expect, not satisfaction, not vindication, but a strange, heavy sadness. Hannah had been a weapon my mother wielded against me, but she had also been a victim of the same dysfunction. She had been shaped into a person incapable of standing on her own. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Hannah said. "I know I don't deserve it. I just needed you to know the truth. All of it. From me." She turned to leave. I let her get 3 steps before I spoke. "Hannah." She stopped, but did not turn around. "Thank you for telling me." She nodded once, then walked to her car and drove away. The financial rehabilitation program began the following week. My family attended every session, completed every assignment, sat through every uncomfortable conversation about accountability and budgeting and the choices that had led them to crisis. It was not easy for any of them. Growth never is. At the end of the first month, my father asked to speak with me privately. We sat in my study, the same room where I had given them their options, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. He looked older than I remembered, the weight of decades pressing down on his shoulders. "I should have fought for you," he finally said. "When you were young, when your mother started treating you differently. I saw it. I knew it was wrong." He paused, struggling to find the words. "She threatened to leave, to take Hannah, to destroy the family if I took your side, and I was too afraid. I thought keeping everyone together was more important than standing up for what was right." His voice broke slightly. "I chose peace over you, and I lost you anyway." He looked at me with eyes full of regret. "I was a coward, Caitlin. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know that I saw you. I always saw you. I was just too weak to say it." I listened to every word. I did not interrupt. I did not comfort him. When he finished, I simply said, "Thank you for finally telling me." It was not forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement. And for now, that was enough. That evening, long after my father had gone, I sat by the fireplace with Ethan and Aunt Margaret. The Christmas tree still glowed in the corner, and the house was quiet in the way only winter nights can be. "How do you feel?" Ethan asked softly. I considered the question carefully. "Free," I said. "I finally feel free." Revenge had never been the goal. Validation had never been the goal. The goal was freedom from needing their approval, freedom from doubting my own worth, freedom to choose who deserved my love and my energy. I looked at Aunt Margaret, who had kept my mother's letter for 20 years waiting for the right moment. I looked at Ethan, who had seen my strength and loved me for it. I thought about the friends and colleagues and chosen family who filled my life with warmth. My biological family might never truly change, but that was no longer my burden to carry. For the first time in my life, Christmas finally felt like home. That Christmas changed everything for me, not because my family suddenly became perfect, they didn't, but because I finally stopped letting their opinion define my worth. If this story touched you, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt invisible to the people who were supposed to love you most? Have you ever had to build your own life because no one else believed in you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your story matters, and this community is here to listen. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. We share stories like this every week, real stories about resilience, strength, and the quiet victories that happen when people refuse to stay broken. Thank you for watching until the end. I will see you in the next one.